We started. Okay. Shall we start again? Good evening. Welcome to the Laramie City Council Work Session, February 11, 2025. And we will begin with public comments not on the agenda. Are there any public comments? Yes, sir. If you can come to the podium and state your name for the record.
My name's Steve Baskin.
It's on.
Steve Baskin.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I came here tonight to try to illustrate to you how you guys or the city has created a parking ticketing system that creates a guilty verdict because it's an overwhelming burden on the citizen to fight it. This is now the second time I've been issued a parking ticket for parking in front of my friend's household. I have the permit that corresponds with the area, but because the ticket had been issued, you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt without any ability to fight it reasonably. I called, I talked to people, I sent emails. I was told there's nothing we can do, come to court. So out of the principle, I came to court. But the first time I came to court, it was simply for another court date. And at that point in time, I caved and paid the ticket because it's overwhelming for me to have to come to court twice and stand in front of a jury to simply state, hey guys, a mistake was made, I have a ticket. And the way that this is done, my assumption is that even someone with a handicap placard that may have mistakenly not properly displayed it would still be able to come down here and say, hey guys, a mistake was made. So while everybody's out there telling me there's nothing we can do, there's nothing we can do, I'm hoping that there's something you could do to prevent me from not being able to park in front of my friend's house. Because right now the deterrent's too high, I'm not going to go back. My daughter likes to play with his daughter, but I just don't want to go and pay $75 every time for making a mistake. Hoping that you guys can do something about this.
Thank you, Mr. Haskins, for coming tonight.
B-A-S-K-I-N.
Baskin, thank you. Thank you, sir. Are there any other comments? Seeing none, we will start our work session with Director Wade. Thank you, Director Wade.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. To start off our work session this evening, I'll just give you a preview of what is coming on this first agenda item. First, you'll hear from one of our audit partners, Abby Hagerman, about the results of the fiscal year 2024 audit. And then you'll hear from me, from staff's perspective on the audit, just some information I want to make sure that I train you on, pass on to the public, and then we'll dive into some of our activity from fiscal year 2024 and take a look at our new community financial report. And with that introduction, I will hand the mic over to partner Abby Hagerman.
Thank you, Ms. Hagerman. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Director Wade. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of City Council. Welcome to the new faces. Obviously, some of you were not here during the financial statement audit, but you get to hear the results of it. So you're going to get the back end, and then I'll come back towards the fall and we'll do the front end of things. But this is a really important thing that I appreciate that the city allows us the time to meet with all of you. As auditors, we oftentimes, are heavily involved with the finance department. And then we don't come talk to you, but you're the ones who hire us to ensure that we're meeting, compliance requirements, that we're in compliance with state statute. So this is important for us to be here. Thank you for getting this presentation pulled up. This was available in the packet. I'm not going to read it word for word because that's, you can read yourselves as well, but I'm going to go over these in high level narrative to talk about what is this process, what does it mean, and where are we at? So thank you. Perfect. So professional standards require us to be here and talk about this. I mentioned before, we work often with finance and we, sometimes as auditors aren't very good about coming down and talking to the council. At the beginning of the audit, you guys who haven't been here, I'll come back again in the fall and we'll talk about how we're going to plan for the fiscal year 25 audit that is currently, halfway over. So we're getting there. The communication helps us elaborate on what are we going to do? What are the expectations? What are the results of the audit that will come out of the work that we perform. We've audited, personally I've audited the city for a long time under lots of different firm names. This is our third under Klinger Hagerman? Yeah, so third under Klinger Hagerman, which is pretty exciting. And as always, we look forward to working with the city. It's a wonderful experience, and the staff just does a great job. So the results of our audit. So we have completed the audit for June 30, 2024. We have to conduct the audit in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted in the United States. And because you're a governmental entity, government auditing standards. The financial statements are the responsibility of management and those charged with governance. The objective of the audit is for us to provide reasonable but not absolute assurance that your financial statements are free of material misstatement. I have to give and obtain reasonable assurance. I can't give absolute, otherwise I would look at every single transaction that happens inside the city, and obviously that's just not feasible. So auditing standards gives us tools and different approaches to apply a risk-based method to help us obtain that reasonable assurance about the financial statements. The scope of our work was described in the earlier planning communications. So if you want to see what I'll talk about in the future, you can look back at that planning communication from the fall. What happened in the audit? Exciting news. Year after year, we thankfully, and this year is no exception, are able to issue an unmodified opinion. An unmodified opinion is the best opinion that you can receive for a financial statement audit because it does mean I was able to obtain that reasonable assurance that those financial statements are free of material misstatements. And that could be, from all different things. That could be internal control issues. It could be that we have fraud or errors or those types of things. So we were able to do enough work to obtain that opinion of unmodified. We do have what's called an emphasis of matter paragraph in our audit opinion. That's something that we want to call to your attention. It's not just the standard report. And the emphasis of matter is placed this year because we'll talk in a little bit because of the ERP implementation and our financial reporting inside of the city became better. We had some errors that were identified and they got corrected. But that's what that emphasis of matter paragraph discusses. This is the long, windy one that I am not going to read to you. The financial statements, if you've seen them, are really long. The city takes their financial reporting very seriously and participates and actually prepares a comprehensive annual financial report that goes to the GFOA for a certificate in achievement for financial reporting. So it's very big. And inside of all of this are some items that have to be presented because you're a governmental agency. So in a government, there's things that are called required supplemental information. That can include your budget information. Because we're a part of the Wyoming retirement system in the state, those entities have to report on contributions, their proportionate share of the net pension liability. Those items have to be there because without them, the governing body for Governmental Accounting Standards Board said it would be misleading if we didn't talk about those. The one thing to understand, RSI has to be there, but I don't provide an opinion on that. Now, we went through and we ticked and tied and made sure that everything agreed with the underlying numbers, but as auditors, we don't express an opinion or provide assurance over that RSI. Because we're preparing and looking at an ACFR, I guess I said CAFR, didn't I? Long time ago, ACFR, Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. Because we do that, there are also additional sections. There's an introduction section and a statistical section. We do not provide opinions over those items as well. But those components don't change from year to year when the city reports. So if you're new to the council, I would encourage you to get familiar with what that big giant ACFR looks like so that you understand what's RSI, what is comprehensive info, what's the introductory information so that you feel confident in what it is that when I come and talk are the reports that we don't have to provide that opinion over. So our responsibility for other information that's contained inside of there is the ticking and tying that I talked about. We don't perform audit procedures, but we do make sure that it's all in line and ties. Let's see here. Oh, we would bring to management's attention if we had any issues. So if for some reason something didn't tick and tie in the reviewing process, we would alert management and we would work through just to make sure it's a really solid reporting package. Significant audit matters. Every year when we come in as auditors, we have to look at the accounting principles and policies and estimates that an organization uses to help prepare their financial statements. The world of accounting is getting more and more complex as the city grows and engages in more complex business transactions, the more estimates there are. So we have to ask every year, and we look at the underlying assumptions that management has made to make sure that they're reasonable. It's not something outlandish. It's not, unexplained. It's supported by historical data, information that's maybe similar to other agencies. And those significant accounting policies we look at. Now, if there were changes to those, then we would have to look at why did you change it? Did you get better information? Was there an error? Was there a new accounting standard that was implemented? But thankfully, this year was kind of a quiet year in the world of governmental accounting, and we didn't have any changes except for the implementation in the way that we presented the restatement, which is really just a bonus because it made it clearer and easier for people to read those financial statements. Now, some of our financial statement disclosures are more sensitive because they have a lot of that, judgment involved, the estimates, underlying assumptions. And so we want to make sure that we call those to people's attention. And really this year, the most significant one that is kind of different than what we've seen is really this note 4F with respect to accounting changes and restatements. And that's just because it's different than we've seen in the past, and we didn't have any other big implementations inside of the GASB standards. Your financial disclosures are neutral, consistent, and clear. That's really important in financial reporting. It's a lot of information inside that report, and we need to make sure that we're ensuring that the report that we see is written so that a user of the financial statement at any education level can hopefully grasp the basic understandings of items. I kept talking about estimates. They're significant. More and more come every year. When I first started, there were probably a couple of these that were on the list down there at like accounts receivable and allowances. But the Governmental Accounting Standards Board changes and improves financial reporting every year. Because of the complexity of the things that the city participates in, you have some more estimates than maybe other entities do. When we look at that, GASB 87 leases, we have GASB 96, which is subscription-based information technology arrangements. Net pension liability has been around for quite a while now. That's a pretty big number inside of governmental financial statements. If there's an OPEB plan, which the city participates in. So all of these, we look at the underlying significant assumptions for these estimates. During the year that we audited for fiscal year 24, there weren't any significant changes to the assumptions associated with all of those estimates. So nice little status quo associated with that. Very happy to, communicate to all of you. We are pleased that there are no disagreements that arose during our work with management or with anyone that we worked with inside the city. That's what we always want to hear. It's not always what we get. So we're happy to make sure that we thank, Administrative Wade and all of her teammates that help us work through this financial statement audit. It's a lot of data. It's a lot of work. And we certainly didn't have any issues there. Everything that we requested was provided to us in a timely manner. There wasn't any holding back or not wanting to share information. At the signing of the audit opinion, when we release that document, management does have to make certain representations to us about the information that they provided us was fully to their knowledge, to the best of their ability. They were forthcoming, nothing was withheld. And that representation happened on December 19th, 2024. That's also the date that you will see on every letter inside of the big giant financial report, because that's the date that we substantially completed everything. So we're not quite at 60 days out, but we're getting there. But the December 19th date allows us to, be pleased that we were able to issue with inside of state statute. State statute does require a municipality to be issued by 12/31 of every year, and that it hasn't always happened. Some things just happen, so it was great that this year we were able to do it. Also, for your Act First certificate, you need to be issued within 6 months of your financial statement date, so that was also timely as well. So that was a big win for all of us. It meant we went to Christmas without having to be worried about, did the submission go through? Do we have anything left? We would need to notify you, and we would have to discuss with management. If we had found out that they were kind of doing opinion shopping, I said, hey, this is how we interpreted some GASB pronouncement, and they said, oh, well, we asked somebody else, and they disagreed with what you said. We weren't aware of any of those, and to our knowledge, those didn't exist during our time this year. If we had other audit findings or issues, we would report to you on those as well. There may be minor things when we're doing the financial statement audit that just, we say, hey, best practice is maybe this. Here's what we've noticed and what we've reviewed. So we really do try to provide value add services to our client, and audit is a commodity. If you're a municipality in the state, you have to have it. Doesn't matter, not your choice. So that's the one thing Klinger Hagerman really prides themselves on, is we work closely with those in financial reporting to hopefully provide them with recommendations or suggestions, or if during the year they're implementing something and want to run it by us, that communication is there, because in the end, it's just a benefit to the city to have those. Because you're a governmental entity, you not only have a financial statement audit, but you also have to, because you're under governmental auditing standards, have your internal controls over financial reporting reviewed. Something that is nice is that the city has such a nice internal control structure, which is followed. It is constantly reviewed. It's looked at from a risk assessment standpoint. We are, as auditors, able to rely on some of those controls. That means that we can run a more efficient audit. We can provide better feedback. We can't do that everywhere. So this was a great place for us. Every entity in the state of Wyoming that has an audit is going to have one of these if they're a governmental entity. It's just nice that we also get to rely on those controls instead of just looking at them like we do at some other places. Now, when we look at internal control, we're looking at the review process, the segregation of duties associated with various areas inside of the financial report. That could be compliance over laws and regulations. How are you capitalizing your assets? What's that big giant net pension liability look like? And if during our testing, we become aware that whoa, what has happened? There was an error made, something wasn't caught, or something was implemented and there wasn't an adequate control, then we would go through and we would do our testing, and we would result in a letter that would identify the types of findings that are out there. Control deficiency, which you see is at the top level here, is the lowest one. That's not going to show up in a report anywhere. These are things that are best practices. Maybe it was something minor that just didn't happen. It was a one-off. So we can communicate those as auditors directly to management. We don't think they warrant the level of attention of a significant deficiency or a material weakness. Significant deficiencies and material weaknesses exist even inside of great organizations that have good controls. We are human, and so implementing a system that involves humans could unfortunately just have errors that occur. So there are inherent limitations to internal controls. So even if there were a finding, it doesn't necessarily mean something is, the whole system is broken or there aren't adequate controls in place. However, for fiscal year 2024, we're happy to report we didn't have any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses to be communicated in our reports. Doesn't mean that maybe there isn't something out there, but the testing that we performed and the work that we did in compliance with governmental auditing standards did not identify anything. So that's always speaks to the quality and caliber of the tone at the top that exists with financial reporting. The last audit opinion that you guys get is a single audit. The single audit is the uniform guidance. This exists because the city expended more than $750,000 in federal expenses. That number is going to jump. We're going to start talk about $1 million instead of 750. When I started, it was, I think, 500. So slowly it's creeping up. It won't make a difference to you guys. You spend more than $1 million also. So the city is always subject to single audit. When we do the single audit, we are looking just specifically at federal awards, and we go through a really rigorous, matrix of how do we select which federal program to test. That program is tested for compliance requirements, and the goal is for us to provide an opinion to say that we presented all of the federal expenditures. We looked at all of the compliance requirements, and yes, they're in compliance. No, they're not. We were able to give an unmodified opinion. Again, that's the best opinion that we can get. The city spent, a little over $4 million inside of the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, the ARPA money on some capital projects during the year. So that information was tested with its material compliance requirements, and we found no issues. revenues. So that's always a great testament to the controls that are surrounding federal money. Obviously, sometimes it might feel like free money to someone on the outside, but there are always strings attached, and we have to make sure that the entity that we're auditing is truly making sure they're complying with those requirements. So that is it for me. This is restricted to those of you who are here tonight and listening online to understand the purpose of this report. It shouldn't be taken out of context. But we appreciate the city so very much in allowing us to continue services with the city. It's always a pleasure. We really, my business partner and I have worked for small firms, big firms, really big municipalities, and we would put your finance team against any one of those. It really is just fabulous. So at this point, I would open the floor if anybody has any questions or comments that I could answer.
Counselors, any questions or comments?
Heads are spinning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much. Hopefully we'll see you guys in the fall. Take care.
Okay, thank you so much. Director Wade?
Thank you, Honorable Mayor. It's my pleasure to dive into staff's presentation next. But before I do so, I just want to acknowledge the tremendous work of the finance team, not only in fiscal year 2024, but especially in the years just preceding that. We have had so much change. You know, we have gone live with a new financial software, and to come out of that implementation with a lack of audit findings is not normal. And in my opinion, just demonstrates the exceptional work of our team. And I want to also let you know that Jen Malmberg is joining us tonight. She was really hoping to co-present with me, but unfortunately, she is feeling pretty ill. And it just continued to get worse as the day went on. And so she's joining us on the screen and in spirit, and is looking forward to being up here to present this report to you next year. But shout out to that finance team. They are still implementing software. So it may appear that things have calmed down, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I know that they will be really grateful for the day when the payroll and HR phase go live and things really do start to calm down just a little bit. City Clerk, if you will pull up the presentation for, yes, that one. Very good. And if you'll go ahead and go to the second slide. So staff's work session tonight really has a few main goals. We want to make sure that we introduce you to our audited financial report, the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, in more detail. And we'll talk to you about staff's responsibilities. So you heard about the auditor's responsibilities. I'm going to tell you from my perspectives what staff's responsibilities are. You'll see that they align. We're going to highlight knowledge that is essential to using these reports. Thereby, we hope we increase accessibility. Although I will say, I know these are technical reports, and so we're just going to skim the surface this evening to hopefully pique your interest and make these things feel like something that you maybe want to dive into because we've given you a path. We will also provide you an overview of the sections of our annual comprehensive financial report, the ACFR, and we'll introduce you to our new community financial report, which is meant to make the ACFR more accessible. So you'll learn more about that later, but that report is actually prepared using audited GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles measured data. And so while that report is not audited, it is prepared using audited data, and there are a lot of similarities. So it's really important. We're going to talk a lot about that. And finally, we're going to review highlights of financial activity for the year, not from the ACFR like we normally would, but from our community financial report. And that's very intentional because that community financial report really pulls out what I feel are some of the best nuggets of information from the ACFR, and of course we'll continue refining that report over time. So that's our agenda this evening. City Clerk, next slide. Thank you so much. Responsibilities of the staff, as the auditor said. Management, that's us at the city. We are entirely responsible for preparing, recording all of our transactions during the year, making sure those transactions are recorded in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. You're going to hear me say that a lot tonight. We're going to call that GAAP. I will say that a few times until hopefully it sticks, but it's our job to make those measurements. It's our job to prepare the internal controls. It's our job to prepare the financial statements. We actually cannot delegate that to our auditors. It would compromise their independence. And if we do ever wish to have any accounting help, which we did ask for a couple of years ago, we cannot do that with our auditors. We have to contract with an independent firm so that that independence of our auditors is maintained. So really important to remember. I'll just pause for a moment. Very nice. I'll continue now. I also want to say that, I think we use the term, you probably have all heard the term audit preparation or audit ready, but many of you may not actually know what that means. What that means is that, in particular, your balance sheet accounts are fully documented, so you can fully prove anything that's an asset, a liability, a deferred inflow, a deferred outflow of resources with documentation. It also means that your revenue and expense accounts, your income statement accounts, you're doing variance analysis, you've got internal controls that are running all year long to detect errors there, and you're making sure that those numbers are right. That's really what it means to be audit ready. It takes a lot of time to do that. It's not something that just happens overnight. And so I want to make sure you know, at least from a municipal government standpoint, what that means. Some of you may have experience with that in the grant world. It's a little bit more involved when you start to talk about an entire entity's financial statements. Next slide. A little bit more about GAAP, our friends, generally accepted accounting principles. They are a set of standards and interpretations for accounting and reporting of financial transactions and events. They're promulgated by a standard-setting body. The Financial Accounting Standards Board is the standard-setting body for our private and not-for-profit entities in the United States, and the Government Accounting Standards Board sets standards for government entities in the United States. You may think, well, it's just a transaction. Shouldn't there just be one way to measure it? And really, if you were just looking at it from a cash basis, yes, that would be the answer. But that's not really the way corporate financial statements are prepared, publicly traded for sure, and especially financials of large organizations. And so over time, there have been standards set for the way you measure transactions to make sure that there's consistency in how those transactions are measured. And if you are, I'm sure many of you are aware of some of the accounting scandals over time. Most of those have happened in regard to the measurement of transactions and the inappropriate application of some accounting principles. And so really important to know that these things are out there and they're designed to make sure that those financial statements that people produce are comparable. You should also know that standards have very much gone to a principles-based approach, really, I think, resulting from a lot of the frauds we saw in the early 2000s. And so less rules-based, more principles-based, although there's plenty of technical guidelines and an accounting standard. If you ever want to look one up, go to GASB.org and have some fun. They're long and detailed. And we don't have discretion about whether we follow GAAP. Wyoming state statute actually requires that we do because we're a municipality. And so we have to follow these guidelines. And finally, every year, GAAP, our friends, change with new implementations. The big implementation this year is related to the measurement of compensated absence liabilities. That will be a large one. Next slide. Why are GAAP important? Well, we really think it's important as accountants that you be able to trust the financial information in front of you, which means that we want to ensure that transactions are recorded similarly across entities that can be compared. That's what GAAP ensures. And that disclosures are a standard set, because you don't want to pick up a set of financial statements and have disclosures that are all over the place. It would be really tough to use those. And so those standards are meant to create comparable financial statements that allow users to make good decisions. Of course, in the private sector, we know that that means if for a publicly traded company, we know that that means whether someone wants to invest in that company. How do we make that determination? For government, the reasons are a little different, and I'll talk about that later. Next slide. We do have, as partner Hagerman mentioned, an annual audit requirement. Here's the statutory reference. Just wanted that to be part of the public record, and we can continue to the next slide. And I'll go over some unique aspects of governmental financial statements. I'm going to catch up with you here. The use of fund accounting in particular is unique to government. And so as you get for some of our new council members in the public, as we get a little closer to budget season, you're going to hear us talk about the general fund, the recreation center fund, the water fund, the wastewater fund, etc. So in government, we segregate financial activity based on the restrictions on the use of those resources. The general fund, by definition, is the fund where everything else goes that shouldn't be accounted for in other funds, which is often why it's the biggest fund. And then all of our other funds represent some type of resource purpose or restriction, whether that's set by external, someone outside the government or the government itself. We have two accounting bases in government. We have the accrual basis of accounting and the modified accrual basis. Very different than what you see in the private sector. It is my opinion that fosters transparency and allows at least our governmental fund financial statements to be measured in a way that makes way more sense to most members of the public than an accrual basis financial statement, which requires a little more knowledge and training to decipher. We have a prescribed format for our annual report, and our success is not measured by profit, but how well we deliver essential services. Transparency, efficiency, sustainability in operations, and effectiveness are just some of the key concepts. And so when you're looking at a government's financial statements, you want to be able to start to assess those things, which is different than if you're making a decision about, say, am I going to invest in publicly traded company X? So the purposes of government financial statements are different. That's why the governmental standards are different. And I feel like that's important because in 2022, government spending in the US was 36% of GDP. So pretty big section of the economy and specialized use. And so that's the context in which these standards developed. Before I get a little further into the ACFR, I want to just take a pause and ask if any of you have any questions before I move on.
Councilors, are there any questions? Councilor Freed.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Wade. I have one question, and I could have looked it up on a dictionary.com, but promulgated. Can you describe what that means? Set by. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You know, that's one of those, I appreciate you, through you, Mayor, I appreciate you asking. That is definitely language you learn when you're passing the CPA exam. And so that's good to be interpreted.
Thank you, Director Wade.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Continue, Director Wade.
So let's talk about what our ACFR is, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. It's a standardized best practice format for our annual report. We have to have an annual financial statement. The contents of the financial statement we have to have are not all that much less than the ACFR. And so why not just do an ACFR and do the best practice and be able to submit it to, for example, the Government Finance Officers Association to participate in the Excellence Program and get great technical feedback. And so for a little bit more work, we really do achieve that kind of best practice benchmark. And we have been submitting to that certificate program for 47 years and earning that award for that time. We get great feedback from those technical experts. Some of it does result in changes to our financials. Some of it we dispute. It just depends on the nature of the comment, but I am grateful for that additional feedback. And so I think it's important you know, we don't have to statutorily do an ACFR. We elect to do one because we feel that cost-benefit ratio is really worth its weight and the extra effort it requires. Next slide. So when we talk about the ACFR, let's just take a beat for a minute and talk about what's in a financial statement. The answer to that is it really depends on the type of financial statement. I think you guys know there are two primary types, a balance sheet and an income statement. We could say a statement of cash flows is also a type of financial statement, but we won't talk about that here. But in general, you know, a balance sheet and an income statement, they're about as interconnected as something can be. One doesn't exist without the other, but they measure different things. So a balance sheet is going to have your point in time measurement. So as of the end of a fiscal year, for your assets, your liabilities, your deferred inflows and outflows, and in a government's case, instead of equity, net position and fund balance. Your income statement is going to, and that's for government, it's the statement of activities and the statement of changes in net position or fund balance. That's going to have the total for the transactions that occur during a period. That period is the fiscal year, which for us runs from July 1st to June 30. I think many of you know we can't elect what our fiscal year is. State statute prescribes that for us. And so when you're looking at that income statement, what you should remember is that the changes that are quantified there represent the difference between last year's ending fund balance or net position and the current year's ending fund balance and net position. So that's why the two shall be always intertwined. So what's in a financial statement number? Well, that depends on the GAAP that's applied to that financial statement. So the generally accepted accounting principle that was used to prepare the financial statement. And this is what I want you to remember. Our government-wide financial statements, the first statements you're going to see in the ACFR, are prepared using the accrual basis of accounting. That's just like the private sector. It's the comparison. Our proprietary fund statements are prepared with the accrual basis of accounting. The government fund financial statements are prepared using the modified accrual basis of accounting, which is more similar to a cash basis of accounting, although it's not quite that. And it is more or less the basis on which we budget. So the really nice thing about those financial statements in the ACFR with the government fund financial statements is it's a close approximation to the same measurement for budgeted resources. That's why I love the modified accrual basis and really appreciate as a practitioner that it's part of our financial statements. There was some buzz a few years ago at the GASB about maybe changing like modified accrual, making it something different. And practitioners push back on that pretty hard because we feel like the current measurement really allows us to communicate what we need to communicate to our stakeholders without making it more complicated than it needs to be, and also upsetting that measurement and changing things once again. And so do be aware that what's in the financial statement number very much depends on the financial statement and a government report. And anytime, if you're using the ACFR and you have questions about this, whether it's council or members of the public, just give me a call. Happy to go over it in whatever kind of detail I need to. Next slide. Here's a comparison. I'm going to give you one example today. Yes.
We have a question. Vice Mayor Richardson.
Thank you. In thinking about that, from my understanding, that could be very confusing if I weren't sitting here right now and even listening to it, trying to kind of wrap my head around like when and why. How do we simplify that message for people who just happen to look online at this information or, our new online tool? What are we doing to try to kind of break that down so people aren't left with questions about, how this all works? Or how do you all do it?
Honorable Mayor, through you, I think that a document like the ACFR is a very technical document that is meant to be read in its entirety. And if you were to do that, the answers to your questions would be there. This work session is one of the tools that we use to really talk about the different bases of accounting. We also talk about the different bases of accounting in our budgetary work sessions. But candidly, most of our financial reports are more on that budgetary basis, the modified accrual basis. That's how you're appropriating resources. And I think that's where a lot of the public interest is in. And so I haven't had a lot of questions over the years about the nuances between the technical accounting, because I'm not sure that there's a lot of public interest, if I'm being very transparent about how I view it. It isn't to say that we couldn't do better. It's that I think it's so off-putting. That's one of the goals of this work session, is to get that out in the open and talk about it in an accessible way. But it is really hard to distill that in a way that feels accessible to people who don't have an advanced level of knowledge. And that's why I think the community financial report is actually very important. We don't talk a lot about the different bases of accounting. We talk more about things that I think people really connect to and understand without getting in these weeds that can maybe drive interest away even. Yeah.
Thank you, Director Wade. Are there any other questions at this time? Continue.
Thank you. So to the Vice Mayor's question, just as an illustration, the accounting basis comparison I can give you is really, it boils down in a nutshell to how the value is measured. It's always about value in some way, and when the transaction is recognized. And so there are 3 examples on the screen today. I'm just going to go through one with you in detail, and it's the one that I think is the easiest for folks to understand. And that's the acquisition of a capital asset. And so let's just sit back and think about this for a minute. So on the modified accrual basis, or the way that you budget, let's think about the way you budget. You're budgeting that maybe we're going to go spend $50,000 to acquire a vehicle. On the modified accrual basis, and comparing that to the appropriation, we're going to expend those resources in the current fiscal year, $50,000 expenditure outlay. On the accrual basis of accounting, you would not do that. You would create an asset for $50,000, which would be on your balance sheet. If that car had a useful life of 5 years, you would amortize the cost of that car, the economic use of that resource, over the 5-year life, and you would see a $10,000 depreciation expense per year. And that is one of the simple examples. One could say the same thing for debt financing. So if we have, let's say we have some lease purchase proceeds or maybe some SRF loan, an inflow. In a modified accrual approach, you would have that inflow of resources, you would recognize that all in the period, and that would be a resource inflow, period. In the accrual basis of accounting, that incurrence of debt would create a liability, and the principal for that liability would be paid down over time as that loan became due. So very, very different. It's also why we have a government-wide statement, of course, that combines all of these things. And so you just have to understand that this is going on and know where you're living. And then, again, happy to offer any assistance. And if you all have some good ideas, if you think there's appetite to really dive in and explore these differences between the bases of accounting, I would love to hear some ideas for how we might be able to do that with the public. City Clerk, next slide. An ACFR is always going to have 4 report sections: an introductory section, a financial section, a statistical section, and an other section. What we put in the ACFR is absolutely prescribed. We don't have a lot of flexibility. We don't have flexibility there. It's a standard report. And so these are the elements that you're going to see in various ACFRs if you pick up one from across the United States. And next slide. So now we're going to get to introduce our new community financial report. However, I think what might be helpful is if we could just pull up the ACFR briefly for a moment. And this is mainly for our newer council members and members of the public who maybe haven't looked at the ACFR before. I just want to give you a visual. Okay, so the ACFR is about a 200-page document, which, if you recall from some of our work on transparency, we think, if we think about transparency as something that's actually accessible to someone, when you have a 200-page document that is highly technical, and our budget books are long, but they're written in language that isn't as technical. Technical 200-page documents, that's tough. It's tough to say, even though it's audited, even though it has this award, even though all these things are present, it's tough to say that that's a document that entices people to dive in. But I still like to think that people might want to. So I'm going to give you a path. So if I had limited time and I really wanted to just get an overview of the ACFR, I would recommend that you review management's discussion and analysis. That starts on page 12. So maybe let's just navigate there. And that runs from page 12 to page 36. So in these pages, you're going to get some condensed financial statements. You're going to get some neutral, fair language about why financial activity has changed during the year. We don't get to have opinions in the ACFR. It needs to be a neutral report. And so this is a really good space to see. Actually, Nancy, it may not be page 12 in the PDF. Let me find it for you.
Okay.
That's the problem.
Right there. If you go forward about 3 more pages, right there.
Yes, page 25.
Keep going. Yep, right there.
Yeah, so
Okay.
page 25. So from page, numbering through the document, page 12 to page 36, I think I said, you're going to see the MD&A. That reads a little bit more friendly. It's really about the results of operations. I think most people would find that pretty interesting, and it is fairly accessible. If you want to dive a little further in, continue to the next pages, which start on Nancy. For you, Nancy, for you, that's page 56. For users, it's page 37, and you'll start to see our core set of financial statements. So this is where we have our government-wide financial statements, and you'll see them just back to back, government-wide, fund financial statements, and more from there. If your interest is still piqued, and because I'm an accountant, of course I'm going to say this, I highly encourage you to read the notes to the financial statements, because the notes to the financial statements are going to dive into those accounting standards in more detail. And so you, of course, don't have to read all of the notes, but if there's a type of balance that you don't really understand, you could skim those notes pretty easily and find information about the things that really don't make sense to you. The other thing you can do is give us a call. We're happy to help with names of balances that don't make sense. If you're like, what's a deferred inflow of resources? I mean, who's ever even heard that? Which some things sound kind of like that. You can find it here. You can give us a ring. And so just so you know, here's the landscape of the ACFR. And then, of course, if you want to read the whole document, I think that's the most fantastic thing ever. But I haven't met many people who have. So Nancy, we'll go back to the presentation from there. Which is why I am excited to introduce the Community Financial Report. So the Community Financial Report is also known as the popular annual financial report. It's the PAFR. We're going to call it the PAFR a little bit tonight, but if I was talking to a citizen, I would not call it that. I would call it the Community Financial Report because that's really who it was prepared for. Nancy, next slide. Oh, sorry.
No, you're okay. It just all of a sudden.
It doesn't help that we had 6 attachments, which of course we did. So while she's doing this, while she's pulling up the presentation, just for our newer council members, you know, when we get to our budget work sessions, those are, you know, more financial heavy sections too. The tone and the tenor is really different. We're talking about the types of resources we have, the recommendations for spending those resources, and it does feel very different than this. This is our only technical work session of the year, and so I just want to, if any of you are maybe worried about that a little bit as you approach budget season, I want you to know the flavor is different, and we teach it in a different way.
No, it's too late. It's working.
So the Community Financial Report really it arose out of our transparency initiative because we realized transparency, it doesn't just mean surveys and connecting with the community to find out what they want. It means looking at what we have and how we can make it more open to the public. You're going to see a demonstration of open finance tonight, which I'm really excited about, which is also part of that effort. But our PAFR, our Community Financial Report, also sprung from the realization that that ACFR might be a little tough for people. And so we need to condense that down and distill it to its core elements. The great thing about the PAFR is that it is prepared. It's required to be prepared using audited information. And so you're going to see tons of connection to the ACFR, to those actual financial statements on the ACFR. And so hopefully that creates a feeling of trust and reliability, even though the PAFR itself itself is not audited. We did develop our PAFR to comply with the Government Finance Officers Association Award Program. I did submit that for consideration this year. We'll see if we get the award in the first year. I don't know if we will. If we don't, we'll get some great comments that will hopefully help us achieve it in future years. And I want to make it really clear that staff chose what to highlight in this report. We did that by looking at many PAFRs from across the country. Spencer, who will present later tonight, did so much of that work. And so we chose what we thought was particularly effective in terms of, and we also chose what we saw repeated really frequently. Because it's a good thing to rely on a professional body of work. And so you'll see some of those things reflected. And we took some guidance from our peers on what felt like was too gaudy and maybe what felt like would be a friendly report. And hopefully we created a report that felt accessible to the community, because what we noticed was each report seemed to have a certain type of flavor. And so we'll continue adjusting that over time, but we want this report to feel like Laramie in some ways. Next slide. So we do have a set of content. You'll notice that the content in this report is very different than the ACFR. We get to do a welcome and an introduction, for example. We talk about our form of government, the council's strategic priorities, some economic highlights from Laramie at a glance. We talk about our city services, and then we dive into that financial information, our net position, our statement of activities, our income statement, and things of that nature. And so it's a much more, for many users who may or may not interact with government financial information on a routine basis, I feel it's a much more welcoming entry into that. And it also gives them some context that, we are a city council manager form of government, that the city council sets these goals, that they guide our spending throughout the year, that we have a budget, those types of things. And now we're going to dive into that community financial report. So I'm not going to highlight the entire report for you. So Nancy, it's just, this one is called Community Financial Report. But we are going to look at financial activity, some of the highlights in this report, just so you can see visually the difference compared to the ACFR and why we felt this was important. So this report is, just as Nancy's pulling it up, it's 17 pages. That's very different than 198, which is in my opinion, much more accessible to members of the public. And Nancy, if you will, maybe let's just go to page 7. So the first 6 pages are really introduction. Page 7 is really where we start with our aggregated financial statements. What we noticed when we looked at PAFRs from across the country is all of them across the board started with the government-wide totals. There's good reason for that, because we know it's the same measurement basis. And Vice Mayor Richardson, perhaps that gets to your comment, right? So part of what we're doing is we're extracting information from the ACFR that can show people without having to explain all the technical detail. So those government-wide financial statements are really important. We've chosen to present the government-wide balance sheet and the government-wide statement of activities. And what I'll point you to is the text just below the summarized net position statement on page 7. So Nancy, we're on page before. Yeah, there you go. Awesome. And so what I've done here is I've actually just, this text is extracted from management's discussion and analysis in the ACFR. And so it's me pulling out from the ACFR the pieces that I feel are the most important to describe the changes in this way in our net position. And so if users wanted to make those connections to the ACFR, they absolutely could. So I'm not creating a lot of new text here. I'm just simply pulling out the most important things. And I'll give you an example of that here. So you can see in governmental activities that about, governmental activities created around 70% of the change in our net position for the year. Most of the change was in unrestricted net position and resulted from declines in the net pension liability coupled with strong period growth in unrestricted sales and use tax collections due to energy development in Albany County. And that actually describes a lot of the reason for the change in the year without having to go through 200 pages of text. I also love, and the did you know, that I got to pull out things like, hey, did you know we have a building authority? Did you know that the activity for this building authority is blended in with two of our business type funds, the water fund and the solid waste fund? I doubt many people know that. City Clerk, if you could go to the next page, the statement of activities. Thank you very much. You'll see here, this is that government-wide statement of activities, and I'll just give you a sampling from governmental activities, the revenue summary. So our revenue in total grew by 7.9 million. That was 14% from the prior year. It was a very strong revenue year. $2.9 million of that increase was in specific purpose tax collections. That's due to one-time energy development in the area mostly. And $6.6 million of that growth is from collections in unrestricted sales and use tax. That's also due mostly to one-time energy growth. Only about $1 million of that is ongoing. And so two really major changes in revenue for the year. I also think it's a great time to point out that only $0.4 million of that increase is from property and auto tax revenue. And I say that mainly because there's so much conversation about property taxes now. And I made sure to include that here because I think it's relevant to our community and some of the conversations that are happening locally. And so these, again, are just me pulling out from the MD&A to customize this report while still explaining the high points of what's going on. You'll see in governmental activities expenses, those declined by 9.5 million. There was a $12.7 million expense reduction for expenses related to the pension and OPEB liabilities. That's pretty significant. Then we also had cost increases in personnel of $1.4 million across all functions, driven by the compensation adjustments that were given last year, as well as reduced attrition. Some of you may not know that in 2020 and 2022, 2023, we had a really hard time recruiting. And so our actual spending in many departments was very low compared to our budgeted totals. And so some of the increase is from that growth too. And so just another example of the high level presentation here. And so the standard I used is, am I pulling out information from that accurate that describes most of what happened in a way that the community would be interested in? And if you want a little more, that management's discussion and analysis in the ACFR would provide that for you. I even had an opportunity on this page to nod to the compensation adjustments because I knew there was a lot of, comment and interest in that. And so I took the opportunity to talk about that a little bit and tell people more about why that was done when the last one was done. And on the next page, you'll see information related to our business type revenues and expenses and a graph that I really love. This is a graph that shows citywide expenses, so all same measurement basis, and what we spend money on. So you'll see, top thing we spend money on at the city is police, at least in the government-wide measurement focus, followed by water, and then highways and streets. I also appreciate that I got the opportunity to start to dive further into activities that have traditionally rolled up in activities like general government, because honestly, I don't think many people would know what that is. And I think it would surprise folks to know that, with that $2.3 million expense, about 4% of the budget, 74% of that is made up by insurance premiums, fees for services with partner agencies, payments to outside agencies, general depreciation, and professional services. I just don't think anyone would make that connection without the ability to explain this a little more, which is what we get in the PAFR. City Clerk, if you could go to the next page, page 9. So the thing I'll point out on page 9 to you is the graph that illustrates the percent of fund balance that each fund holds. You'll notice that the general fund and the specific purpose tax fund hold most of our fund balance. It's also another reason we spend a lot of time in the budgeting process talking about them. So I really wanted to highlight that here. And City Clerk, on the next page, on page 10. You'll see that I start to dive more into detail in the general fund. The general fund, as you know, is primarily supported by taxes. We don't have control over a lot of the revenue sources, and so during the budgeting process, we spend a lot of time talking about this fund. And I think it's important to educate folks about what happens in the general fund because so many of our government services are provided for in this fund, and it's hard for folks to understand. It's a lot easier to understand what's maybe going on in the water fund or the wastewater water fund in total. But this fund, there's a lot of activity here. And so I take the time to explain the different revenue sources, the health of those revenue sources, and the material changes in those revenue sources. And you'll see here at the bottom of this page, the most significant changes in revenue highlighted, the top three. Sales and use tax collections, we've already talked about those. The direct distribution, $2.5 million increase due to legislative appropriations. That absolutely is not going to continue. And a $1 million growth in investment income due to our revised cash management strategy. So all about, in a nutshell, what do we think are the big things folks need to know? And wrapping up the presentation on the community financial report on page 12. It's another graph we really like. We found this graph in the Raleigh, North Carolina PAPR, and it's an illustration of revenues and expenditures in the general fund in relationship to each other. So you can kind of see how that all shakes out in a graphical format, because we know that many people learn in that way better than they learn through text. I hope I have provided you with a nice overview of not only the ACFR, but our community financial report. And at this time, I would be happy to answer any questions you have before we close out this agenda item.
Thank you, Director Wade. Councilors, questions, comments? Councilor Lockhart?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Wade. Just a quick question on the collection of the property taxes. Is that the amount that people were charged or the actual amount collected minus any delinquent taxes that were not collected for property taxes?
Director Wade?
Mayor, through you. So this is the amount of actual collections. Yes, good question.
Any further questions? Is that Councilor Bowling? No. Director Wade, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, okay. If you'll bring him in, or
Counselor Newman, I think we're ready for you.
Can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Awesome. I just had a comment. Wanted to thank city staff for putting this on, the auditors for doing great work. And I apologize for not being there.
Oh, we certainly understand.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Newman.
Any further comments? Councilor Bowling?
Thank you, Mayor. Mine was just a comment, and thank you, Director. Because this is a level of incredible nerd that I don't possess, though I have many other nerd qualities. But the PFAR was an incredible resource for me to be able to understand, because I do learn in that visual sense. And so I just want to thank you and all the other staff for making that available. I think it's interesting that you're able to customize the report for the moment. Say, for instance, giving people more information about property tax or direct distribution or something like that. And so I'll be interested to see, based on what happens at the state level, how we need to customize that again, maybe based on revenues that we will anticipate not having. But it's a really helpful presentation, and I think it pairs really well with the next agenda item. So just thanks.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Turns out I actually do have a question now based on Councilor's comment. How often, I'm assuming this is a once a year update, or are you anticipating updating this more frequently?
Mayor, through you, actually, I was going to close out with something I forgot to say, which is this. I'd love some comments on what you all would like to see. And so we will next year look at this one more time. Of course, and if we've gotten comments, that definitely is going to influence what the report looks like. We will be astute. We will read what we can. But I actually am very grateful for any feedback you or members of the community might have for us on how this report can better meet the needs of our community.
So,
Vice Mayor?
thank you. Appreciate that. And again, I think this was noted, so much easier to digest. I have been, as a thought for others, I know a lot of people always have questions about our finances. I have put this in my signature line so that people can link directly to it. As an option, not that anybody else has to do that, but it's a quick and easy way to direct them to this information. So that's all.
Councillor Bowling?
Thank you, Mayor. And just this is just came to mind based on Councillor Richardson's comment. It would be interesting also to see, I think, as our councillor suggested, to if there is an update or if it happens, if there's a need for that over the course of a fiscal year. However, I also just looking at this and looking at the AFAR, that it seems also very labor intensive. So I would want to balance updated version against what staff has the capacity to do.
Okay. Are there any public comments on this work session? Thank you, City Clerk. Thank you very much for the presentation, councilors, for your questions and comments. We'll move on to the next work session. Director Wade, Laramie Open Finance, Introduction and Demonstration.
Go to the first slide. Okay, so as you know, we actually implemented new enterprise resource planning software, Munis, Tyler's Munis product, this past year. And the one of the more exciting results of that, in addition to modernizing our business systems, which I don't know how you can get more exciting than that when you haven't upgraded for 20 something years, is this Open Finance data tool. And I want to make sure you know it's a data tool. It's in a web-based platform, but it is it derives its data directly from our financial software with no additional manipulation by city staff. The information is updated weekly on that data platform from our ERP software. And so that's a pretty unique thing that users are able to just dive right into that financial software in a very safe way, get the data they want, and be able to inquire on it. The phase that we are spinning up live, or we spun up live last month, it is what we're calling Open Finance Phase 1. It's a tool that allows people to look at an aggregated level at spending or revenue. The tool that we will roll out probably in May now is the checkbook feature. And that's the tool that's going to allow people to look at more individualized invoices. And we'll have another work session on that checkbook feature once we're ready to go live with it. But it took a little bit more work to refine and some back-end work for us. And so today we're going to be demonstrating to you that first phase of this cool new data tool resulting from our ERP implementation. I want to really acknowledge the work of Spencer Couturi, who is a senior accountant and who more or less got this thing live while I worked on the PAFR. And so Spencer has spent many, many good hours of work validating data, making sure the totals were right, really making sure that the totals that the public sees are the same as the totals that you all appropriate funds for, because like we talked about, there's a lot of accounts that are more like that accrual basis of accounting that require technical knowledge to understand, and we didn't want this tool to be that. We wanted this tool to be about budgeted use of resources, because that's really where most of our public have their questions, and those are the things they want to know. And so that's what you see before you tonight, and that's what we have validated. Spencer, I stole your first slide, but I think you'll be fine with that. we want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the city's funds here. You're going to see as Spencer demonstrates this tool for you that you have to choose a path for your inquiry. I like to call it choose your own adventure. But you need to understand a little bit about government finances to be able to do that. We think the most important thing for you to understand, or for members of the public to understand, is the concept of funds. Because we know that we just can't aggregate all of our resources and spend them on anything. Now, Spencer's going to show you how to inquire on things like how much electricity does the city use in total. But in reality, we're accounting for the electricity that the city uses in each fund because each fund has separate restrictions. And so it's really important to realize that. And it's important to know when you get to those points of navigation where you get to dive in deeper and drill down what fund means. And I don't think a lot of people would just inherently know that. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time tonight talking about our funds just briefly before we dive into the demonstration. Next slide. So our major funds. We have our general fund. We said earlier that our general fund is the fund where it belongs if it shouldn't be accounted for anywhere else. It's the fund where most of our tax revenues live too. Our specific purpose tax fund is a fund that only accounts for activity related to the 2018 specific purpose tax. The Capital Construction Fund is a fund that only accounts for major capital initiatives. That fund gets its resources either from grants and loans or from contributions from other city funds. Our proprietary funds include our water fund, our wastewater fund, and our solid waste fund. And starting in fiscal year 2026, our surface water drainage fund. So you'll see a new one there. Those are our business type funds. Those are the funds that council sets the rates for through ordinance and sets those rates in accordance with a 10-year financial plan. And so those funds tend to be fairly stable. And what you're really funding is infrastructure, long-term infrastructure over time. Next slide. We also have a set of non-major funds. These funds have a smaller amount of resources and activity, even though those resources are restricted. So we have our E911 fund, which we administer with the county's consultation for 911 tax revenues. We also have our recreation center fund. Most people are familiar with that fund. The economic development fund, which we talked a little bit about last week, clarified the purposes of. The opioid settlement fund, we haven't seen a lot of activity in that fund yet, but those resources are all from the opioid settlements. Those do have very much resource restrictions on them. The Parks and Rec Development Fund, which is primarily a pass-through fund for recreation mill funding, and the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund, which is a fund that receives its resources from perpetual care on cemetery lots. So it has a small amount of resources, but an important purpose. And finally, our internal service fund for health insurance, which we are closing out this year because we have transitioned from a self-funded insurance plan to the state's plan, which is one of the better it may be the best financial decision I feel like we've made in the past 2 years in terms of reducing risk and our liability to the city. And next slide, I think that's all. And so just big picture, those are the city's funds. Again, happy to talk to anyone about that. Really easy to find information about funds. You can find that in the budget book. That's probably the most accessible way to find it. Of course, this presentation, other sources. And again, if you all have ideas for how we can talk about these things, I'm super happy to hear them. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get Spencer set up for his demonstration, and we'll let him take the reins. We could. And I just need to turn my volume down, right? Yeah. And city. And city clerk, we shouldn't have to have audio or volume because we're just sharing the screen, correct? Spencer, you can take that away.
All right, so Open Finance can be accessed a few different ways. We did email out a link a few weeks ago when we went live. However, we do have a way to get there on our website, so I'll just go ahead and show you that real quick. We'll just go to cityoflaramie.org here. And then we'll go to departments, and underneath the department's revenue, we have admin services and accounting and finance. And then from here, we have this open finance button on the sidebar. And there's an FAQ here, but we'll just go ahead and click this link. All right, so now we're at the main landing page for Open Finance. And we can see at the top here, we've got a header with a few options. The meat and the potatoes of the website is accessible up here. We've got operating revenues, operating expenditures, capital revenue, capital expenditures. I'll talk about those a little more in a bit. We've also got some support resources that we've prepared for you all, some video tutorials and user guides as well. And then some links to additional resources, our monthly financial reports, two of the things that we talked about earlier today, the new community financial report, and the ACFR is here as well. And we've also got links to our budget publications. Anyway, moving on down here, we have some links to some common questions that kind of illustrate the types of things that Open Finance can tell you about. It can give you information on revenue that the city takes in and also expenditures that we expend. So you'll see here things like what departments spend the most on personnel. If you click that, it would take you to the part of the website that explains that. And there's also a search box next to here as well. The search box can be used to get to what you're looking for, but often it's easiest to navigate through using the 4 sections of the website, which are listed below here. So we see those 4 main sections. The website is essentially split into operating budget and actuals and capital budget and actuals. And then each of those sections is further split into revenues and expenditures. So in each of these 4 sections, you'll see things with a slightly different flavor. You'll see accounts in operating revenues like taxes would be in there. That sort of thing. Think recurring revenues that occur through the city's day-to-day business. In operating expenditures, you'll see normal day-to-day expenditures. So the big things in there would be personnel, maintenance agreement expenditures, and just operating supplies for all of the city's various operations. Moving on down, this capital section shows information related to more long-term investments. So on the expenditures side here, you would see numbers that include things like big capital projects, vehicle purchases, large equipment purchases. And then the revenues here are the more one-time revenues. So mostly that's going to be revenues tied to specific items. Like, for example, if we're using a loan to purchase a vehicle, or we have a big state revolving fund loan to build the North Side tank, you're going to find that in the capital revenue section there. Anyway, moving on down here, we do have a fun little widget here that can show you operating revenues, and also it can show you budgeted expenditures. operating expenditures as well. Unfortunately, my Zoom seems to be taking up the button to click to see that, but you can click through and see a widget outlining operating expenditures that are budgeted for the current fiscal year. Oh, no, it won't go. Anyway, so before I move on, I just want to sort of give you an opportunity to begin thinking about something. This tool is great at answering questions about what kinds of things, what kinds of revenues the cities is taking in, how much those revenues are relative to other revenues, and the same with expenditures. What are we spending money on, and how does that compare to other things that we're spending money on? So I would encourage you all to just begin pondering if there's something that you're curious about, like how much does the city spend on this thing, or how much do we receive for this thing? Just if you would begin thinking about that, and then with the mayor's permission, maybe a little later we could explore one of those questions together and see if the tool here has the answer. Fantastic. I will introduce you to a couple of these sections here. I think it would be best to dive into operating expenditures first, simply because there's the most accounts in that area, and I think it can be the most interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and click the Explore button. And this will take us sort of into the meat and potatoes of the tool here. This screen is where you'll be finding most of your information. You'll see right now, it's telling us that it's showing us information for fiscal year 2025, which is that July through June fiscal year Director Wade talked about earlier. And it's telling us that it's showing us operating expenditures broken down by fund. And so it is currently showing us operating budgets and actuals for each fund individually. And then at the bottom here, you can see that they're listed in aggregate too for all funds. But this is a data tool. It can be used the way you want it. You know, as Director Wade said, it's kind of choose your own adventure. So you can organize this data in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of different methods that you can take to drill down to what you're looking for. The main place that you're going to want to start is this drop-down menu. So it says that it's currently showing us total operating expenditures broken down by fund. Again, if you see these light blue bars, those are showing the total revised budget that the City Council has approved to date. And then the darker blue bars are showing actual expenditures so far this fiscal year. We're a little over halfway through the fiscal year, so you generally expect to see that this blue bar would be a little bit over half the size of the lighter blue bar. Anyway, though, if we want to organize this data differently, we have a few different options at our disposal. Department is the first one here. You'll see that this shows the names of various different departments. It can be useful in certain circumstances. One thing to be aware of is due to our fund structure, some departments will be repeated in a way. So like you'll see, for example, police is listed here, but if you were to scroll through, you see that the E911 fund is listed here as well. The police department has operations in the E911 fund. You'd also see things like, oh, Parks and Rec is listed here, but we've got the Recreation Center fund listed separately below. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're using that department option. I really like the division option if you're trying to drill down specifically where certain expenditures are occurring. these divisions are also what we refer to as cost centers during budget season. So we've got police admin operations is the one that's showing us as having the most spending to date, and then followed by EMS and fire admin suppression. Actually, it looks like it's organized by revised budget here right now, which I do apologize. Part of my screen is taken up by Zoom, but you can sort things differently in the side menu here.
Able to help you out a little bit and maybe get rid of this.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Let's try
Thank you,
that.
Jen.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, that's division. Division can be great because it's generally very specific about the area that the expenditures are occurring in. We've also got this category option. Category rolls things up into various different buckets. You'll see that these closely correlate with the buckets that are used in both our budget and our monthly financial statements as well. So we can see things like personnel all aggregated up, contractual services all together, materials and supplies all together. The last way you can sort information is account. An account tends to be very specific. So that means that it can be very useful if you have a very sort of granular curiosity, I guess. But you'll see things in here listed like benefit, employee wages, medical benefits, also like electricity is here. Overtime is here, operating expenses, all sorts of things. From here, you have a few options. So once you pick something here, you can further filter down your data to find what you're really looking for. Like if I was curious about electricity expenditures specifically, I could just go ahead and click on electric. And we'll see now it's just showing me electric expenditures only broken down by fund. So I can see that the general fund had $243,000 in budget for electric expenditures in aggregate. And so far this fiscal year, we spent about $157,000, for example. You'll see this utility fund listed here. That is our water and wastewater funds together. So if you ever see that, you can just go ahead and click on that, and then you'll get the option to narrow it down to water or wastewater. So that's a brief overview of the expenditures side of things. I did also want to show you the revenue area just because it does look a little different. So to get back out, I have a few ways I can do it. One thing to know is that you can always look on the sidebar to see how your data is being filtered. So if I go in another level here, I can see that my data is being filtered to be only operating expenditures, only electricity in the general fund. And I can always click one of these links to go back a level and unfilter my data. But right now I want to go out to revenue. So I need to go all the way back out to the home page. So I'll click that home button. And then from here, I'll go ahead and go into operating revenues. So I'll click explore. This looks very similar to what we were just looking at. The big difference is instead of looking at expenditures, we're looking at revenue projections and actual money that the city has earned. So what we see here is that in our menu here, operating revenues broken down by fund. We have options here as well. There's a few less than on the expenditure side. And that's simply because our ledger is structured a little differently on the revenue side. There's less accounts, so there's less need for specificity. The options that we have on this this side of things are category, and account, and of course fund. So if I was curious about a revenue area, I could click into a fund that I am wondering about. So I'll click into the general fund. You can see that they're broken down by category now. And we can see that it looks to be ordered in order of actuals or budget, one or the two. Regardless, clearly the biggest revenue source in the general fund are those sales and use taxes for the fourth and fifth cent. We do have options from here. Like, we can even drill into this even further. If we want to have a look at the fourth and fifth cent sales and use tax in more detail, we can go into this account level and we can see, hey, this is composed of actually this is composed of the state mandated fourth cent tax, which is that municipal share use tax. And then we can also see the breakdown with the fifth cent, which is that local general purpose sales and use tax that voters have approved. From here, I'm not sure if I haven't touched on it yet. I do want to point out all the data is shown in tabular form down here, and we do have totals. There's a few other great tools available to us here. If we want to use the site using pie charts instead of graphs, we totally can. And I think it can be a little cleaner sometimes. So we can see general fund revenue just broken down by category here. And if we want to click into a specific slice of the pie, we totally can. Get a little more detail that way. You can always hover over the slices of the pie to see that detail. We also have this over time option, which is kind of cool. It goes back a few years. So we can look at how the information has changed the past few fiscal years. We can view totals. If we only want to view the fifth cent, we can do that. So that's an option. In most of these interfaces, you do have a choice of viewing revised budget that you as the city council have approved. We also have actuals. And then if you want to look at the original budget, that is an option here as well. And again, these are, since we're looking at the revenue side here, these are revenue projections that we're looking at when we're looking at those budget numbers. But anyway, that's that. We also have at our disposal the ability to export information. So if this tool has some sort of deficiency or you want to analyze the information in a different way than it lets you, you can totally click this button and it'll give you a CSV, a comma separated values file, which is a file that you can open in Google Sheets or Excel or any spreadsheet program and manipulate the data however you would like. And just thinking here if there's anything else I wanted to touch on. I think that largely does it. You know, again, like these are the kinds of things that Open Finance can help you with, but it's also kind of neat just to go in and see, oh, hey, you know what are the general categories of operating expenditures in the solid waste fund? It's get an idea of what's going on there. So it can be used both ways, but I would like to open it up if anyone has a yearning question that we can see if this tool can answer. I'm happy to have a look.
Counselors, does anyone? Counselor Freed.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Spencer, this is awesome. What an amazing thing for our community. I guess just curious, like, can we dive in enough, and this is just because you brought it up. I don't have a big desire to learn, but to see if it can work, just like how much electricity the Ice and Event Center uses.
Totally.
Something like that.
Totally. Yeah. So if you were to do that, electricity is an operating expenditure. We saw it in there earlier. So you're just going to click on explore. And then from there, we see that we have our different funds here. The Ice Event Center is a general fund operation, so we'll just go ahead and click in there to limit our inquiry a little bit. And this isn't something that I would expect any unfamiliar user to know, but the Ice and Event Center is a cost center in our ledger structure. So it's a division. So I'm going to go ahead and look in here. And we can see all our divisions listed here. Oh, totally. That's probably a better approach, huh? Yeah, so if you didn't know, we'll go here and we'll go way back out to operating expenditures, and we'll just try to find electricity first. How about that? So to do that, we'll go to account, and we can see that we have a bunch of items listed here, and electric is pretty significant. So I'll just show that again. We're in operating expenditures broken down by account. And then we can go on down and we see electric listed there. And we can click into that. Now it's showing us that information by fund. We don't see Ice and Event Center. It's not a fund. So we could check department. We can see that we've got a few things here. Parks and Recreation is probably worth checking out for the Ice and Event Center. So we might click into there. And there we go. So it's telling us that we've spent about $35,000 so far this fiscal year there. And if you want to, you can look at past fiscal years. So we can totally see that the total for a full fiscal year, at least last fiscal year, was 49. Yes.
Any comments or questions?
Yes, I'm happy to answer general questions about the tool as well.
Councillor Lockhart?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Spencer. My comment is all the information you have given us this evening is going to consume tons of awesome time. So I'm very
glad to hear it.
I'm very excited for the transparency that's all this is, because one of our goals as city council is to be transparent. And we're not going to remember everything, but at least we're going to know where to find it and direct our constituents, the community, to where, because we're going to learn along with it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for all the hard work everyone's done. I'm looking forward to the next step too, but got to get this one down first.
Vice Mayor? And
I think I answered my own question, but just to double check. So for example, I'm in electric, and at the top, it says 52,653 for 2024. That was the budgeted amount, correct? And then the blue line is the actual?
Let's see, so you are in,
I'm in 2024 though.
and you're looking at the Ice and Event Center?
I am looking at, but let me tell you where I am. I am in Ice and Event Center, and then contracted services is what I got to under that. And at the top, like the big blue at the kind of top left says 52,683 when I choose year 2024.
I have to be honest, I am not sure whether that is actuals or budget. I should be able to find out here really quick though.
And I'm assuming actuals based on the graph below. I mean, is budget based on the graph below, because the light blue is over that 50K mark and the dark blue is.
That's probably.
So I think that's right.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, just had to talk that through for myself.
Yeah,
Thank you for
it's
helping
not-
me with that.
It's not terribly clear which that number is. I apologize for that.
okay. Counselor Vihil.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is mind blowing, quite frankly. This is so impressive. And so you might have already answered this and I might have missed it, but how do you decide which kind of software you're going to go with for this type of thing?
Oh.
I would imagine you'd be doing a lot of like benchmarking and a lot of just seeing what's out there, but like, how did you decide on this?
I can tell you that there were a lot of considerations, none of which I would be the best person to answer that question for. But I'd be happy to open it up for the director or the city manager to speak to
that. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Spencer. Just to reiterate, very cool. Just a couple comments. I think it'd be really cool if this was also a widget on the city homepage under online services. Because we have applications, Parks and Rec, bill pay, etc. And then, it would be great for us to include into our email signatures as well, like Councilor Richardson's doing with the public report. But it'd be great to see it like right there on the landing page. I guess I have two questions. One is how many other municipalities in the state are operating with this sort of transparency on their city government page, and are they using the same software? And then I'm curious to know like what level of granular detail you can get to when the checkbook feature rolls out. Like if I wanted to know how much the city paid for this specific software this year, would that be does it give you that level of detail? So thank you again for all the work. That's awesome.
Through you, Mayor, Councilor Bowling. Yeah, so this can get at very granular totals, but it is limited in that it can't show you individual transactions. It also can't show you individual information on changes to the budget that you might approve. So the checkbook feature, it will be able to give you transaction by transaction detail on payables that we've expended. I don't really know entirely yet how easy that information will be able to work with in aggregate. If you want to see, for example, if this is the total that we've paid for X specific thing, I don't know entirely yet with that. And then I'm sorry, would you mind repeating your first question again?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Man, really, that was just a nerd question.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if you know of other cities in the state that are.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
No, we do not. Before we rolled this out, we had a look at what other cities were doing who were using this platform. I came across none in Wyoming, and I checked.
Counselor Freed.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, a few questions and a comment, and just I think all of council echoes just how impressive this is for our community. So thank you all, and Director Wade, for your team for getting this done, because this is huge. And just to reiterate too that all this information has been public and available, but now we're making it per public comment and per what councils have decided is important, we're making it digestible and easier. And I think that's so important that the city has listened and been a part of that conversation and has taken action. And this is no small undertaking, as we now know from this presentation, but I'm just really grateful for that. And my two questions, one, how do you generate those common questions? Is that based on, how many people are searching for something, or, just curious on how that comes across?
These were not generated through any scientific method at all. They were just things that we had thought that people might be interested in as we were assembling the website. And we hope to add to that in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. Second question, and that makes total sense. Second question would just be how often this gets updated. Because I know you said like, we might make an amendment or something to a current budget. And so is this a quarterly updated software or just can you describe that, please?
Through you, Mayor, this is updated weekly directly from our financial software. So it's subject to the caveat that obviously that requires a human to enter the information into the software, but it comes out of our software every week.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Richardson.
Thank you. Yeah, just echoing everybody's thoughts on this. Very, very cool. And I know we had talked about initially when we had like just barely explored in here, a way to have access to a person if people had questions about this. And I see that if you go to guides and FAQ, you can kind of get there. I would love to see that contact information for the department to be a little maybe higher up on that FAQ or something, just so people can right away find the person to ask questions about rather than start to make things up if they can't find a person right away, right? So having that more accessible, I think, would be great. But this is fantastic. Thank you all.
Thank you for that feedback.
Are there any public comments on this work item
I think Director Wade might like to say a few more.
to say?
Again, I just want to acknowledge Spencer's fantastic work. He's done fantastic work the whole time he is here, and this is just one example of it. And I'm so pleased that he was able to present what I think is a truly glowing product to you this evening, and I really appreciate your attention. I want to make sure that you know a couple of things. Spencer did create some video tutorials that are very short and accessible, and we heard that from the council. We really would encourage people to use those video tutorials. They're super short, and his user guides are also very accessible, no more than 2 pages. Directions are very clear. And so we will also incorporate some contact information there, but we recognize that most people actually learn visually, and lots of people like videos. And so I'm just going to give a shout out to his work there and also tell you that I think those are really good resources that distill down how to navigate this tool. I will also say for the public record that the first time you use it, you might not have success, and I think that's part of the learning process. And so I would recommend that people maybe plan to spend 15 minutes just warming up. Watch some videos, warm up a little bit, give it half an hour of your time, and then I think it will start to feel more smooth.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that people will just be able to maybe dive right in unless they have that natural tendency to do so, and it doesn't bother them. And so I don't let that 30 minutes deter you. It's a pretty short learning curve. Use those resources, and most importantly, tell us if those resources are not working and how we can do better. Because really what was on our mind is how can we make this easy for people? And if we miss something, we're certainly happy to go back and do a little more work there. I want to speak briefly to the selection process question that Councilmember Vigil had. It was long. We did business process mapping, and then we generated a list of our system requirements, and then we issued a request for proposals or qualifications, I don't remember which, and then we interviewed folks who responded, made sure that they could do what we wanted, and it took months actually to select. And then to answer Councilmember Bowling's question, I do believe that you could get at invoice detail for the Socrata expenditure. Whether you knew that it was Socrata Open Finance would be an issue, but you would at least be able to drill down on Tyler Technologies. We would get a separate invoice for Socrata.
Mm-hmm.
So I think theoretically, in response to your question, you could, yes. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. This is really amazing. I know that this has taken a lot of time and a lot of effort, but it really addresses some of council goals related to public transparency, engagement, and public education. And I'm just so excited to have this and to get in here and to learn more how to use it and how to guide others in that. Very good presentation. Thank you. And I'm sorry I cut you off. I didn't realize that you had more. So I want to make sure I got public comment. Is there any public comment? And none online? Thank you so much. Very much appreciated. Yes. Yes. Now we'll move to our last work session, which is our community survey results.
Thank you, Council. So I'm going to ask Brandon Moen to come up and start off the work session. As you know, we have been surveying the community using Zen City as our partner platform for providing that survey out into the community for collating the data, and they'll be joining us tonight to present those results. I wanted to mention, I believe this is our fourth or fifth iteration of the survey. The goal for management is over time to track change from survey cycle to the next survey cycle to the next survey cycle. And so I think Brandon will introduce our guests this evening from Zen City, and they will talk to you about what the results showed and how they changed from last time.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think City Manager about covered it, but they are going to be presenting our Q4 community survey results. Hannah Paradine is our customer success manager, outgoing customer success manager. And then I believe Noah is their analyst who will be giving us all the nitty-gritty details. So I won't take any more time. Those are the introductions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, my name is Noah Huber. I am a survey research analyst at Zen City. I'm here today to present some of the data that we've collected from respondents in Laramie and their sort of thoughts and sentiment with regard to how they feel living there. And I believe that we have a report, but I'm not sure if that's something that we can pull up, but I'm more than happy to just go over some of the preliminary results here. I can just jump right into it if it's.
I was going to say I'm happy to share my screen too, but I think it's coming up right now.
Okay.
Perfect.
Awesome. There we go. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind scrolling down to page 3. Just very quickly looking at our methodology and sample, we collected 464 respondents and got their answers to some pressing questions about how they feel about the community. And we used US Census data to ensure that our sample is representative of the demographic makeup of Laramie. So we can go ahead and move forward to page 5. The first question is looking at overall quality of life in Laramie. 54% of respondents said that they are satisfied with the overall quality of life, and that sentiment is pretty consistent from the previous cycle. One thing to note here is that those aged 55 and older had the highest level of satisfaction at about 67%, or 2 out of every 3 people in that age group. If we want to move on to the next page there. Looking here, or excuse me, on page 7, the following 2 questions are about how likely the respondent is to still be living in Laramie 5 years from now on the right, and then on the left there is how likely they are to recommend Laramie as a place to live. So in terms of recommending Laramie, 45% percent of respondents said that they would be likely to do so. Pretty consistent with the previous cycle. What we did see, however, is a 7% drop in the amount of respondents who said that they would be unlikely to recommend Laramie as a place to live. And presumably, we saw that make up into more people being neutral when asked that question. And then on the right there, you'll see the question about how likely they are to still be living in Laramie 5 years from now. That's also at 52%, around half of respondents. One thing to note here is that it is down 9% from the previous cycle, but still we're in around 50% of respondents saying that they're still likely to be living there. Notably, like I had said, in similar to the previous question, here we see a bit higher negative uptick. So about that 9% drop from positive ratings, we see an 8% uptick in negative ratings. So just something to take a look at there. If we want to go down to the community characteristics on page 9, there are a few interesting stats there. At the top, we have the highest ranking statistics. So at the top there, you'll see that the sense of overall safety in Laramie is very high at 73%, as well as access to quality post-secondary education and quality of parks and recreational amenities. Relatively consistent with the previous cycle, a little bit higher than the previous cycle, but all in all, still looking very good. On the next page, on page 10, you'll see some of the characteristics that scored a little bit lower compared to the others. There at the bottom, we see overall quality of services provided by Laramie City government. That's at about 29%. But one thing to note here is that that number is up 9 points from the previous cycle. And if we go to the next one there, the ability of residents to give input to the Laramie City government, that's at about 28% positive ratings. But again, that number is up 6% from the previous cycle. And then overall street and road maintenance there is at 21%, but it's swung up 8 points from the previous cycle. And more specifically on that note about the ability of residents to give input to the Laramie City government, not only are we seeing that uptick, but if we scroll a bit further down to slide 13, we had a follow-up question asking what the most important thing Laramie could do to improve the ability of residents to give input to the Laramie City government. And on there at 18%, you'll see that many people suggested an increase to public forums and city hall meetings. And it's my understanding that we're already doing these Fifth Tuesday meetings. So to me, this data suggests that there's a bit of a gap in awareness as to how residents can provide input to the city government. And perhaps this is an area where we could see a bit more in terms of connecting with residents and helping them better understand that the Fifth Tuesday meetings are the perfect place where they can go ahead and share that input. But all in all, the community characteristics look very good. The majority of residents are satisfied with their quality of life in Laramie, and the majority said that they're likely to still be living there 5 years from now. At this point, I just wanted to cover a few of these characteristics, a few of these stats, but are there any questions, anything surprising?
Hey, Noah, before we move on from here and definitely want to, save some space for questions, but I did want to highlight a couple other things from this data. Just generally, we tend to also really highlight the neutral scores. I don't know if that's something that you all have heard in previous presentations, but when we see a neutral score, it's something that allows for us to get excited about the possibility of moving these folks into the positive space. A lot of our clients do tend to pair the positive and neutral scores together. And so just want to highlight that while some of these scores, have maybe dropped a little bit or a little bit lower than maybe where, you are pushing for them to be, there is so much, possibility there in terms of folks that are there in the middle. I also want to note, as you're looking at this data, the drop in negative is also something to highlight. So on this slide on 13, it's great that it's, improving by 6% positive, but it's also dropping in negative by 12%. And so, more folks are moving from negative into neutral, and some of those, neutral folks are moving into positive. So just to kind of understand that translation there. Just wanted to highlight that. So definitely want to open the floor if there are any specific questions on anything that Noah has mentioned so far.
Are there any questions? Councillor Bowling?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for the presentation. This this may be a silly question, but having not been familiar with Zen City before this, respondents are recruited digitally correctly over social media, targeted ads, websites, etc. Is there any way to know, or is it targeted that are there respondents that are pulled multiple times? Like, could a respondent respond in 2 cycles and we see that change by an individual, or is it a new sample in every cycle?
Yeah, so it is possible for respondents from one cycle to another for the same respondent to be, providing their input. It's not always, a one and done thing where a respondent does it, in the previous cycle and they're not allowed to do it again. So it's certainly the case that one respondent, a year ago submits their answers to this survey, and then a few months ago does it again. So then, those changes are also reflected. But more generally speaking, because it's a representative survey of all of the residents that kind of make up Laramie, it's more about grasping the trends like across all of the residents.
Yeah. And also just to highlight, we are collecting, digital fingerprint and a couple other, forms to understand that in one cycle, one person can't submit more than one time. So like Noah's talking about, because we're not collecting PII, we can't say like, Sarah Smith from Laramie filled it out a year ago, and now we know we filled it out, this time. And because they're targeted ads, there is a chance that Sarah Smith sees that, time and time again. But it is nice to sometimes have a spread of new folks and previous folks, just because, all of those voices are important. And also it can highlight some changes that are happening because of the great work that you all are doing in Laramie as well.
Thank you. Councillor Lockhart, and then we'll go to Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Noah and Haley, for your time. The concern I have about this is we have 32,000 people in Laramie, not all being adults, but only a sample composition of 464 respondents. What can we do as a community to get more input and feedback? Because I think it's pretty hard to take this data from 464 respondents when, say, we have half that are grown adults that could give us more input. And what can we do as maybe a city council to get that information out there and city staff? Because I don't ever remember seeing the survey. So now maybe I even took it. I don't know. I'm a busy man like everybody else here. So maybe I did. But I would like to find a way to get this out to more people so we can have a more valid, results. Thank you.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. Thank you for that question. From a methodological standpoint, 464 responses is certainly more than enough to get a accurate and valid picture of this kind of sentiment. So while that number doesn't seem like a lot of people from a methodological standpoint, that is certainly enough to get a very accurate picture of what sentiment looks like in Laramie.
And also to add to what Noah's sharing, outside of methodological process, we also have a couple other tools in our toolkit that we're working with Brandon on, just to, and Owen, to expand the voice of your residents. And that's something that I don't know has been talked about with council at this point or not. But for example, the Engage tool that we have allows us to be more expansive with the surveys that we're running. So while this is a smaller sample size, there are other tools and other ways that you all are already paying for with Zen City to reach an even bigger audience than that. And while it won't be representative in the way that this community survey is, it is, ways to get more feedback from residents on things that you care about. And you could even replicate, the community survey and put it through the Engage platform and get more voices, just with the knowledge that won't be representative and won't be following that methodology that we have. So I definitely hear you and understand that. And I think that's something that we're continuously working on with Brandon and Owen on.
Thank you. And City Clerk, if you can bring in Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify that we are not doing the 5th Tuesdays right now. We do have a work session coming up at some point to discuss what we want to do with that. And it would be great if we can get that 18% to reach out to us and give us a better understanding of what they would like to see as well. But I wanted to clarify that for any public that might be watching. We currently do not do those. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for that clarification. Further questions, Council? Seeing none, are there any comments from the public?
I'm sorry, Mayor. I don't think Zen City's finished. There's a few more slides. I think
Oh,
that
okay.
they had just paused for questions, and I think we all thought we were going to.
All right. Well, then we shall continue.
Those were actually the majority of the findings that we found particularly interesting and noteworthy that we wanted to point out. But I'm happy to walk you through the rest of the community characteristics. If we want to go back up to slide 9, page 9. So yeah, a couple more to point out. The availability of a variety of art and cultural events. We're looking at 53% saying that they are satisfied with that in Laramie. But if you look on the right, compared to the previous cycle, we're up 7 points on that. So it's, again, swinging in the right direction. When it comes to acceptance of residents of all backgrounds, that bar at the bottom there, that one, we're at 49%, so about half of respondents saying that they're satisfied with that. And like Hannah had mentioned, one thing to look out for is that neutral group. They're also, while they're not saying that they're particularly satisfied, they're certainly not saying that they're dissatisfied. So that's also something to take into consideration. And when it comes to the acceptance of residents of all backgrounds, one interesting demographic difference there was that female respondents, we saw a 12% dip in satisfaction for those respondents, which kind of makes up for that 6% drop. So just something that I thought was interesting from the data. Another thing that was also quite interesting was the ability of residents to give input to the Laramie City government, sort of going back to that one. Male respondents are up 10% there. Which is obviously interesting, looking at these gender dynamics, these gender differences. When it comes to age groups, one of the characteristics that had more interesting distribution was the overall quality of services provided by the Laramie City government. And I believe that's on the next page, on page 10. Yeah, so that's the third from the bottom there. A little bit interesting in terms of the distribution of age groups. For those that are 18 to 34, as well as those who are 35 to 54, that's where we saw the highest uptick in terms of positive sentiment, which I thought was noteworthy, given that earlier in the presentation, in a previous page, we saw that the highest level of overall satisfaction, overall quality of life was from respondents who were aged 15 and older. So it's very nice then to see that respondents that are under the age of 55, we're seeing that more of them are saying that they're satisfied with the overall quality of services provided by the city government. So just another thing to keep in mind there. So those are the majority of the main statistics that I wanted to pull out, some of the main things that I found interesting. So if we want to go down, we can keep going through some of the follow-up questions, some of the focus areas that we were interested in. On page 13, we just discussed the ability to give input to the city government. If we want to move on to question 14, or excuse me, slide 14, the next question was about the quality of waste and recycling services. It's at 48% satisfaction. So again, about half of respondents are saying that they're satisfied. We saw a 3% uptick from the previous cycle, which is obviously really good to see. And as you can see on the right there, the demographic breakdowns are relatively consistent across those demographics when it comes to age and different types of home ownership. If we want to continue on to slide 15, some of the notable answers when asked about the main reason that they were unsatisfied with the quality of waste and recycling services. Almost 40% said that the cost of service was too high. And then a few of the other choices that were quite popular was that it was a low quality of existing services. There are other services that might be missing. And some folks are saying that they don't have access to recycling services. And those options got about 1/3 of respondents, so about 1 in 3 were saying that. But that was specifically asked only to respondents who, when asked about the quality of waste and recycling services, answered that they weren't as satisfied. If we want to go on to slide 16 there. This follow-up question was on the overall quality of services provided by the city, which we've touched on a little bit. We're at 29% there, a little less than a third saying that they are satisfied. If you look on the right, the demographic groups, relatively consistent in terms of their satisfaction, that distribution. But if you look at, again, men there on the right, we're seeing an 18% increase from the previous cycle. And then the middle income respondents, those are respondents with an annual income between 50,000 and 150,000, also saw an uptick from them as well. If we want to move on to page 17. So then again, this is a follow-up in the event that respondents said that they weren't as satisfied with the quality of services. They were then asked what they think is the most important thing that Laramie could do to improve the overall quality of services. And as you can see on that chart there on the right, the standout answer was develop a transparent communication strategy that keeps residents informed about service changes, improvements, and city initiatives. And like we've been discussing, I think this kind of goes back to that communication sort of thing, and additionally the ability to provide input to the city government. But it sounds like that is something that the city is definitely working on, and looking at the trend data from previous cycles, it seems like some of those efforts are making an impact, but certainly something to keep in mind going forward as well. And then finally, the last few slides are just looking at some benchmarks compared to cities that are around the same size, have similar demographic makeup. If we go to slide 21, the overall quality of life in Laramie is a bit lower in terms of its benchmark score. That is at the top there, but as you can see, I mean, it's marginally so. And likelihood to recommend Laramie, a little bit lower compared to our benchmarks of sizes that are similar size, have similar demographic makeup, and then slightly lower as well for the likelihood to still be living in Laramie 5 years from now. But if you move on to slide 22, looking at benchmarks for satisfaction, you can see that the main thing that we want to point out here is respondents' sense of overall safety. Laramie ranks far and above higher than its peers when it comes to the overall sense of safety. And quality of parks and recreational amenities also scoring much higher than its sort of peers or the benchmark, as we would say. So those were kind of the main points that we wanted to come to and bring up today. And again, if there are any more questions, happy to answer those.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Richardson.
Thank you. Sure appreciate y'all presenting this information. And I'm sorry, I need to do a real quick search so I can remember what page it was on. Next one, sorry. My question is, can you share why you included in the survey access to quality post-secondary and then access to quality K-12 if that is not something that the city is responsible or provides?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to that a little bit. So even though it's not something that the city provides, it's certainly an aspect that residents may take into consideration when they're thinking about what the quality of life is like in Laramie, what living in Laramie is actually like. So it's something, just another thing to sort of think about when it comes to understanding respondent sentiment, when it comes to how they feel living in Laramie.
And I just want to also add to this, Noah, there's a few in here that maybe you don't have direct control over. I know a lot of times with healthcare services, that's another one that tends to be, brought up. And we tend to suggest keeping it in there for a variety of reasons. One, like Noah mentioned, it's still a great understanding to know from your residents, but also if you have a strong relationship with those industries and you're able to pass this data along, it also empowers them and allows them to utilize that data for good for the residents in Laramie as well. So it's kind of like a twofold, two-pronged concept, and all of this was discussed in our partnership, but hopefully that makes maybe a little bit more sense.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Freed.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And yeah, thank you, Noah and Hannah, for the presentation. Awesome information, and thanks for doing it. My question goes back to something we talked about before. So we surveyed 464 residents, and Noah, you touched on it a little bit, but could you just describe how that is reflective, of a population that's 32,000? Are there metrics in your assessment that, can directly correlate to 100 people's responses could be equivalent to, let's say 10,000 people, or if there's any information on that you could provide, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to surveying populations like this, it depends on the size. And with Laramie's population, like I had said, 464 respondents is actually pretty high, and certainly more than enough to be representative of that population. Normally for a population of this size, we want to hit the 400 mark. That's to ensure that we have a really good margin of error when it comes to these numbers. And 464, those additional 64 respondents just brings that margin of error down even more. So our confidence levels are very high when it comes to a sample of this size.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, I'll go make, Counselor Shumway.
Thank you, Mayor. As I listen to this, I gather that we have three possible responses. One is neutral or no comment. Another is negative. The other is positive. And from what I gathered, there is combining the neutral and the positive. It trends very well for the community, for the city council, for government, but it trends very poorly for at least one thing that I picked up on, and that's streets. Is there anything else that you found that combining negative, it was higher than the combined totals of no comment and positive? Anything besides streets?
No, I mean, then that's an absolutely great insight, great takeaway there. As you mentioned, if we combine the positive, those like high satisfaction ratings, along with those neutral sentiments, we're almost always looking at over 50%, normally closer to 75%. But like you had mentioned, the overall street and road maintenance, that is the only community characteristic where the combined neutral and satisfaction, highly satisfied scores are less than the negative scores. Very good, very good insight.
Thank you. And Counselor Newman.
Thank you, Mayor. My question's for city staff. Could we put a QR code in the utility bills that we send out to maybe, because it seems like a lot of counselors are having concerns about the 430 some. Could we try to blast that out through the utility bills to see if we can raise that number a little bit more?
I will let Zen City folks jump in, but I will mention, Counselor, through you, Mayor, we do advertise widely when our surveys are out on the street, in addition to the algorithms and the placements that Zen City's software uses. So maybe they can talk to you about that also. The utility bill's a great idea. I think when you hear from Zen City, you'll see that it probably reaches more people even than that. Because I understand they're now advertising the survey through shopping platforms. Yeah. So if you're online shopping, you might get solicited to survey. Go ahead, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. Again, coming back to a methodological standpoint, in order to make sure it is really representative from our point of view, it's very important to us that we do as close as possible to what we call random sampling. And that way we make sure that we get a very diverse group of respondents. We're not too focused on people that are shopping on one platform, or too focused on people who are particularly diligent when it comes to looking at their utility bill and scanning for a possible QR code. We want to make sure that we reach as broad an audience as possible, which is why it's really important to us, again, to use that sort of random sampling method. Yeah. It's important. It's important for us to get as many different types of people as possible from as many sources as possible.
And just to tie in a previous note that we had mentioned with the Engage tool, where we have additional survey functionality, that's a great place where if you wanted to send out a QR code through the mail, or you wanted to host a QR code in the library, or you wanted to have someone with an iPad, at a city event, and you want to get more feedback, that is absolutely something that we recommend, and it's something that majority of our other cities and counties are doing. But when it comes to, like Noah was talking about, this representative sample, we try to keep it as neutral as possible. We do, inform folks that, hey, you might see this. If you're scrolling on Instagram, you might see this ad. It is safe. It is something we recommend you take. But we're not specifically looking for people who like really want to be involved or people who like have such a loud voice. We want to reach the people that might not traditionally be reached, that don't have time to show up to, city council working sessions, who, might not be calling the representatives, but genuinely are just like, working class individuals who are scrolling on Instagram before bed, and they're getting an opportunity to share their voice. So I think that the QR code makes a lot of sense and something that we could consider working with in another capacity outside of the community survey.
And if I could, Mayor,
City
if I could
Manager.
follow up, I think to Councilor Newman's question, I think what our Zen City representatives are expressing is maybe concern about using a QR code and being careful in how we do that, so we don't introduce sampling bias or move away from that random sampling. Am I being accurate in paraphrasing what you're trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something where, we're collecting that sample. So it's not, on Laramie at all to, even if you didn't want to publish anything about it, obviously we recommend you doing that and informing the public, but we are doing that on our own. And so we do recommend not utilizing any methods to collect data for this community survey to keep it representative.
Yeah.
And any other questions or comments? Seeing none, then I will ask for public comment. Is there any public comment? City.
I just wanted to talk a little bit first about each to close out the presentation, if you could.
Yeah, Mayor, I do think this actually dovetails nicely with the conversation we were having. We do use a lot of those advertising outreach marketing methods when we do these engagement, these insular surveys like our budget survey. And that'll actually kind of lead into a discussion of what surveys we are going to be putting out shortly and which surveys we do have live currently. So we do have a waste habits and diversion survey that the EAC requested we put out, which has been live for just under a month now, I think. So it'll have one more month in its cycle. We have done things like that. We've done social media posts. We've had flyers with that QR code, things like that we try to use for outreach opportunities. So that is something that we have been using. They explained, I think, why the community survey doesn't have that, but we do use those methods when it comes to our insular surveys and those engagements specifically. We do have one more coming up, which is that budget survey. We did it last year and we will be doing it again this year. We're currently workshopping it, adjusting to some of those comments and preferences that citizens expressed last year on things they'd like to see changed and maybe done a little differently. So we're workshopping those right now, working with our budget committee and figuring all that stuff out. So good.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Kind of to follow up on some of what you said, the social media that we do as a city, do we do any paid advertisement for that, or is it just all kind of? That's the end of my question. Do we do any paid advertisement for those?
I'm sorry. Are you referring to with those engagements and?
Generally, so any of the like notifications that we have out that are like this road's going to be shut down or whatever that looks like, do we ever take the opportunity to kind of push those out further by paying for it? And the reason I ask is I just wonder if our reach could, in thinking about this survey, I think it's great we had some increases, but I would guess that most of us think we could do even better than that, I would hope, than where we landed on some of that. So are there opportunities to, if we aren't doing some like paid pushes, that sort of thing, on more of just kind of the general information to start to engage more of our population a little bit more?
Yeah, through you, Mayor, and I think the Zen City folks might be able to speak to this, but their platform does offer the ability to be able to pay and have those same strategies they use for their community survey. Having those targeted ads and random, getting it all over the internet kind of thing, they do offer that as a service. So if there were other things we wanted to utilize that for, we could certainly explore that opportunity.
Up on that, Mayor, Councilor Richardson. So we pay Zen City to place this survey to make sure that it's advertised, to make sure that it is conducted in a statistically relevant and methodologically sound way. So I guess I would say that our subscription to Zen City Service is the paid advertising that I think you're asking about. It's just maybe different than if we would say contract with Facebook to place a paid ad on Facebook. But they're placing across a host of different platforms, including what's the name of the shopping one, Brandon? Help me. Zen City folks, help me. I can't remember what you call it. It's like Google Shopping or something. Anyway, I understood from Owen that was a new addition, but they are like, it's popped up in my Facebook feed. It pops up when I'm online, and I know what it is. So I go, oh, cool. Zen City's working. Yeah. So.
Vice Mayor, you had clarification.
Yeah, I guess I understand that for the survey that is happening, but just for some of our other general posts, is that happening?
I don't believe we've placed any paid ads on Facebook. No.
And just to clarify from what Brandon was saying, and I can't speak to the, commercial side of this, but I do know that it is a functionality that we can offer to push out other paid ads for other reasons. If that was something that you wanted to explore, it's something that we've done for other cities and counties around the United States. So if that is something that we wanted to explore, then we can definitely, have that conversation on topics that you really want to push forward and you want to get, more eyes on. And we can kind of show examples of how others have done that.
Thank you. You'd like to come to the podium, please?
In follow-up to that last one, statistical variance, when you do invest in other methods of media or expanded awareness in other markets, what have you witnessed as compared to our size, our community, if that's clear? Thanks.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. I know I see that timer there, but if you could provide just a little bit more clarity and context, I would appreciate it.
The lady you just spoke about the opportunity existing to do more expanded awareness, where that has been done and that option has been taken in other communities, what has been the difference found in those communities as compared to our community of 464 response? What might we expect in a variation if that were employed elsewhere? What would we might expect here?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I can't speak for sure on what the outcomes would be. I know that there's a variety of reasons why other, cities and counties have utilized that functionality to push out more information through those paid ads. Obviously with the interest of informing their residents on whatever it is that they were informing them on. So for waste and recycling, for example, if there was a new initiative that was coming out about that, or there was a drop in price for that and you wanted to get more eyes on it and you wanted to put together an ad, then that's something that we could, talk about pushing that out the same way we would with the community survey. But the other part of the question, I think, is where I don't know that I'm quite clear on, because when it comes to the community survey piece, the actual representative sample, that wouldn't be affected by this. This is the conversation around anything else outside of the community survey that we might want to get additional feedback on or additional insights on. We could use the additional tools or the ability to, put out paid ads on those topics. So I hope that answers your question. And if not, I would love to hear more.
Thank you, Hannah. All right. Next, we will move to City Council updates. Councilor Bowling.
Thank you, Mayor. No major updates for today. Councilor Vigil was able to attend the LPAC meeting today on my behalf due to a personal thing, and I have a meeting with the rifle range tomorrow, and then training for the Police Advisory Commission on Friday.
Thank you, Mayor. So our last kind of council updates at our last work session, I didn't have any updates, and that is quite the opposite this week. Yeah, let's start with, last week as we learned, the Human Rights and Relations Commission has an almost full board now, so that's really exciting. I'm having a conversation with a couple of people under 25, because that's the demographic we're missing right now, next Monday. And so more on that. Really excited to get that up and running. This past week, I had my first town gown meeting. And so that went really well. Lots of updates there, and I know Mayor Cumby that you were there as well. But from my end of things, looks like they'll be hosting their spring community meeting on April 10th from 11 to 1. There was a really interesting conversation there between our local and county law enforcement and the University of Wyoming, just in terms of some concerns about immigration and that current bill that was going through our state legislature, and just kind of talking about how students are feeling. There's feelings of fear, of confusion, etc. And so that was quite the talking point in the town gown meeting, and I thought we had some fruitful discussion on that. Town Gown was also pretty instrumental in helping to promote the Polk Center for Community Resources grand opening, which had around 200 people. That office, in full transparency, I lead that office on the University of Wyoming campus. It's a basic needs center, focuses on food security, and just a lot of other basic needs. Issues for students, including like housing and the opening of a clothing closet. And so, yeah, I thought that was a really good example of how a town gown partnership can work. And then let's see, aside from town gown, we have our Albany County Transportation Authority meeting on Thursday morning of this week. So that will be the first one I'll be attending for that. And then, as Councilor Bowling mentioned, I was able to go to LPAC today. They had their strategic planning session last Friday. That was really successful. There was an artist information session for the 3rd Street Gateway program with Laramie Main Street and the city of Laramie. That call for artists closes on March 3rd. And then really exciting, Winterfest is happening this weekend. Something that I learned is that event is completely free to the community. So they're not charging for anything, which is really wild because they have so much happening and going on. I really got to learn just how busy LPAC is. And I think that they're a wonderful organization and resource for our community. For example, City of Laramie is doing free skating at the ice arena. LPAC distributed 12 mini grants to folks who are putting on some yoga sessions, knitting sessions, things like that. And so it's a really exciting time, and I know I'll be there and hope to see some of you.
Thank you. Councilor Shumway.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no updates this week.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Richardson.
Thank you. I attended the Main Street meeting, and they are kind of helping a little bit with Winterfest as well, not as much as LPAC, but I think they've got a little bit in that. They're also organizing for Flavor Fest, which, if you remember, they bring in national cuisine down to some of the restaurants downtown to kind of bring folks down there, and that is happening now. We're also doing some planning, having a focus on communications, and working to empower businesses. So that's the long and short of that one. We were supposed to have a Downtown Development Authority meeting tonight, and that was canceled because we didn't have a quorum. So that will take place March 17th, I think. Pretty sure.
Thank you. Councilor Newman.
Thank you, Mayor.
Oh.
I sent council an email. If you
Oh,
guys
that's right, you did.
if you guys want to read that, and somehow city clerk, if you could put that in the minutes, if the public wants to read the board update, that would be fantastic.
Thank you. I have that here. I'll go ahead and read it. Councilor Newman attended the LCBA meeting on January 29. During the meeting, they discussed the WyoTech expansion project funding and how that's going. The board had questions about how many students this will add, how many jobs this could create, and how the financing is going to work out. There was discussion on Project Jupiter and the loss associated with the project. They also talked about how the board should come up with a contingency plan for the buildings that were being rented for the project. They had an update on membership and how they can better support members and recruit members. And lastly, they discussed a housing project they have started working on with the local school district, WyoTech, and others. The school district will provide land to LCBA. LCBA would then make the plots ready for development with creative financing they discussed. This topic will be discussed more, and I'll keep updating council the more I know. I'm setting up a meeting with Brad Enzi to get caught up on the last year or so to give council a good update on what they have been working on and accomplish. Thank you, Councilor Newman. And Councilor Lockhart.
Thank you, Mayor. Since last week, I attended the Planning Commission meeting yesterday afternoon. It was quite energized. I had sent you everybody an email last week from Megan Getz in regards to Lamar and the text amendment for digital billboards. And very interesting conversation, good points made on both sides. It was declined, so I think we'll be seeing that come to council, and I'm really looking forward to some good discussion about that. That was the big topic yesterday. And then also, Ms. Rebecca Miller had talked to me last fall before I was elected to check out the Albany County Housing Coalition. And so since housing is a major growth plan that we want to invest in, I was able to finally attend a meeting yesterday, and I was very interested in how they had their breakout groups. Mayor Cumby has been going for quite some time. She said there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work, so I'm very interested in learning all about that and all the stakeholders that are involved. So those are the two meetings I was able to attend organization-wise.
Just curious, Councilor Lockhart, which breakout group did you wind up in?
The one with the financial incentives and
barriers. And okay,
yeah,
very
to be
good.
exact, yes.
Thank you. Councilor Freed.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I have no new boards or commission updates from last week, but I have 4 meetings this week. So I should have a great update next week. Thank you.
Good luck. And I also attended the Town and Gown, and there's not a thing I could add to your report except to say it really was a robust conversation, and we had a full room, and it's just so exciting to see the revitalization of Town and Gown and the outreach that it can have. We also had a informal meeting with the Cheyenne LCCC Business Center, and Councilor Lockhart attended that as well. And they were wanting to reach out to us to begin exploring possible partnerships, workforce development, adult education, etc., and how they can partner with our local initiatives and businesses and things. It's in the very early stages, and we have decided to meet quarterly for now to see what we can get up off the ground with that meeting. I also met with the Housing Coalition. I'm part of the partnership Action Committee. And we were asked to identify areas that we thought really needed to be addressed. And what we have observed among the 30 to 40 people that are now attending is that we're still lacking business people who are representative of businesses in our community. And we think that that could make a great contribution to the group. So our group is going to reach out and try to make some connections related to that. And airport board meets in the morning at 8 a.m. and the mental health board meets the following Monday. And that's it on mine. And we're about to get a copy of the agenda. Thank you for your reports. Very thorough. Well done. Does everybody just have one? Oh, you have them.
Oh, gosh.
They came in both sides. Okay.
I thought it was the second sheet, but we're just staring at one. Sorry about
No,
that,
I have
guys.
them. I have them too.
Okay.
All right. So looking at the agenda for next week. Any comments on the consent agenda?
Is there any way that could get emailed to me?
I just sent it, Mayor. I apologize for that, Council.
Councilor Newman, the city clerk has just emailed that to you.
In the middle of liquor license renewals today, I apologize. We forgot to attach that.
Any comments on consent? Any comments on the regular agenda? Councilor Bowling.
Just a point of clarification, is number 15 on the regular agenda, amending the rules of procedure that we worked on during our last work session?
That is correct. It is. There are 2 amendments being proposed.
There, Mayor, if I could, there are a few more that
Oh.
we discussed, like reordering the agenda and things like that. I'll make sure to call all of that out in your cover sheet so it's very clear what changes have been requested by council and what proposed amendments we have.
Okay. Thank you, City Clerk.
You're welcome.
Good question. Any other questions or comments? Then that closes our work session and this meeting is adjourned.